of choices to figure out when I was doing this talk. A month ago when I gave a talk, I've been sort of on the Eightfold path, and a month ago I gave a talk on the second step. And Alpesh and I are going to teach together next week, and he's going to give a talk on the first step. So today I decided to have a conversation on the 3 middle steps of the Eightfold Path of Sīla. And, you know, it helps to have titles for things. I really never think about titles, but after I started putting more personal stories into my talk, I had a few options. First I thought, walking the middle way, stories and Sīla on the Eightfold Path. Then I tried right words, right deeds, right work, living the heart of the path. Then I came up with ethics with a smile, Sīla in everyday life. But I landed on this one, Sīla in the wild, stories of the path, the woods, and the workplace. Because I found as I was adding my stories in, that they really covered a vast array of everyday experiences. And the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path is a profound guide to liberation, offering a practical and an ethical framework for transforming suffering into awakening. And among its 8 limbs, the 3 middle steps, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, are grouped under the umbrella of Sīla, or ethical conduct. And these are not merely moral suggestions, but they're skillful means to live in harmony with others and to free our hearts from harmful habits and to cultivate a life nurturing wisdom and compassion. Sīla is a word that's usually translated as virtue, morality, ethics, or ethical conduct. And it's considered a training, as we can train capacity for virtue similar to how one trains the body in the gym. And the Sīla training includes a set of perspectives and practices that help us live with greater harmony, as much as our own being with other humans and other living beings, and even the planet itself. In this way, Sīla is really about relationship. So before diving into the 3 Sīla trainings, it's important to ground ourselves in the first 2 elements of the path, right view and right intention. These serve as the philosophical and the motivational foundation for ethical conduct. Without them, Sīla becomes rigid moralism rather than a liberating practice. The Eightfold Path is not a set of rigid commandments, but a dynamic, interdependent map for freedom. It unfolds 3 major training categories: wisdom or panya, ethical conduct or Sīla, and mental discipline, samadhi. So right view and right intention, the first 2, is about seeing and stepping clearly. The first step, right view, is the understanding that our actions have consequences, and it includes the recognition of the 4 Noble Truths. Right view is not about dogma, it's a living wisdom that reveals itself through our direct experience. Right view, samadhi in Pali, isn't about adopting the right beliefs, it's about seeing clearly, especially seeing into the nature of suffering, of dukkha, its causes and the possibilities of liberation. It is the lens through which we see reality clearly. In understanding the 4 Noble Truths, we see that there is suffering, a cause of suffering. We realize sometimes it's softened and it's called discomfort. Some people refer to suffering as discomfort. there's the cessation of suffering, and then there's a path to that cessation. Without right view, we might live reactively, chasing comfort and avoiding discomfort, and with it we begin to see that our habits of clinging and aversion and delusion are not the enemies. They actually are the curriculum. And now we can notice our reactions. The Buddha emphasized in one of his suttas, the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the middle-length discourses, number 117, that right view is the forerunner of the path. But right view isn't just philosophical. It's deeply practical. And when I see that harsh speech leads to regret, or that generosity brings peace, I'm living from right view. It's like putting on glasses after years of blurry sight. The world doesn't change, but we see it differently. The second step, right intention, follows naturally. If right view is seeing clearly, right intention is choosing wisely. The Buddha described 3 acts of right intention, which I spoke about the last time I spoke. The intention of renunciation, the intention of goodwill, and the intention of harmlessness. It's a softening of the heart, a letting go of me first impulses. When I was younger, I thought renunciation meant giving up decadent foods like chocolate or something. Or that I might have to move to a remote place of practice, which I actually did for a few years. But the deeper meaning really is this: letting go of the craving that fuels the suffering. One morning, standing on a hillside of trees that had a vast view of the ocean when I lived on Maui, during a long retreat, it was after a breakup, a very difficult breakup. And I really realized after a while that I was grasping not for the person, but for a version of myself that only existed in that relationship. And that insight was a burst of right view, and it gave rise to the intention of finally releasing. I followed the path along the hills, and I realized that the hills and the trees, they didn't give me advice. The trees just stood there in their dignity. And that helped me stand in mine, finally, and begin to see the blessings of that separation. And I saw how I clung to the familiar, even though they were upsetting. I clung to the familiar emotions. Right intention flows naturally from right view, and it's the intentional stance we take toward life. I'll mention it again. The Buddha identified 3 aspects of right intention: the intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will or loving kindness, and the intention of harmlessness, compassion. And these are the seeds from which the next 3 steps of Sīla, harmonious living, on the Eightfold path grow. Wholesome speech, wholesome action, and wholesome livelihood. Intention is the forerunner of ethical behavior. These 2 are sometimes called the wisdom factors, the first 2 on the path, because they help us see and aim well before we act. Without them, Sīla becomes rule following. With them, it becomes love in action. And with these 2 foundations in place, we step into Sīla, the ethics of a liberated heart. The Buddha's Eightfold path is often depicted as a wheel or a set of steps, but I actually like to think of it as a centipede or a millipede. We had lots of millipedes in Hawaii, centipedes too. But I think of this not as creepy, but because it moves, it's alive. Every foot of this path helps us walk toward freedom. And when we neglect one, we hobble. The training in ethical conduct is rooted in the principle of karma, or karma, which is a law of reality, like gravity, that says every single action we take has a consequence. I poetically define it as what you do matters. Specifically, the Buddha notes how actions rooted in unwholesome motives, like greed, aversion, and delusion, lead to suffering for ourselves and for others. And alternatively, actions rooted in wholesome motives, like wisdom, love, and compassion, lead to well-being for ourselves and for others. And importantly, which of the direction we go matters. More organically put, the Sīla training is rooted in paying close attention to our motivations, the actions that spring from them, and the consequences of those actions. In Majjhima Nikaya number 9, the Buddha says, one who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. So what is Sīla, or harmonious living? First comes right speech, truthfulness with kindness. Right speech means abstaining from false speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. That's a tall order for a species that invented Twitter. The Buddha gives us clear guidance. One should speak only what is true, speak what is beneficial, speak what is endearing, and abstain from idle chatter. The Buddha defined it in another sutta as refraining from false speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. In this way, beyond avoidance, right speech encourages us to use language as a tool of connection and compassion. I think I learned about the power of right speech the hard way at one of my Thanksgiving dinners. My cousin, who enjoyed making provocative political statements, usually after his third glass of wine, blurted out something that was especially incendiary. And instead of pausing to think about what I was going to say, I responded with a sarcastic quip, and the room fell silent. And the mashed potatoes suddenly seemed to be very interesting to everyone staring down at their plates. And I realized later that I had spoken not to connect, but to win. And that's definitely a good way to stop a conversation. And it didn't feel very good either. After that, I began noticing how many times words have wanted to blurt out of my mouth so that I could prove something or be right, rather than being loving or kind, or even have the right timing for when to speak or when to be silent. Those of you who know me know that I have a rather straightforward presence, and sometimes it's a little harder to control. It's definitely part of my path. As the Buddha advises in another one of his suttas, one should speak only that speech by which one does not afflict oneself or others. Another time that I decided to practice mindful speech at a retreat center where I was doing some chores. You know, when you go on retreat, you're usually, they call it your yogi job, and you're in the kitchen, or you're helping serve food, or you're doing something with other people. And I was doing some chores, and a fellow yogi told me how overwhelmed she was feeling. And normally I might have offered unsolicited advice or try to fix it. But this time, instead of offering advice, I simply said, "That sounds really hard." And her shoulders visibly softened, and she looked kindly at me as if at least she felt heard. Sometimes right speech is not about having the right words, but being present with the right heart. Humor can sometimes support right speech as long as it doesn't lean into sarcasm or cruelty. The Buddha himself used some gentle humor often, sometimes turning debates into teaching moments. More than once, if you read some of the suttas, you'll find that he lightly rebukes Mara, who is the evil force, or it's also referred to as the negative evil forces that come up in the mind. But he would say, "I see you, evil one." So there's a little lightness that goes a long ways. You know, how many times have I caught myself complaining, mostly is what I do, complaining about something and then saying to myself, "I see you, Mara," because I have a habit pattern that, comes up. And if I can just slightly catch myself and I can say, "I see you, Mara," it lightens my attention that I've been aware of what's really happening. Right speech invites us to ask, is it true? Is it kind? Is it timely? And sometimes, especially at Thanksgiving experience, is it necessary? Right speech doesn't mean brutal honesty. It means choosing words that are true and kind, words that connect rather than conceal. We can ask ourselves, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it of benefit to the other person? Is it kind? Is it the right time? Can we say it gently? These are the 5 suggestions that the Buddha made for us before speaking. This really makes us stop to think before saying something reactionary that might come out of our mouths. Sharon Salzberg, the co-founder of Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and she's a modern day teacher, she said this about right speech. When speaking, we aim for speech that is truthful, helpful, kind, and timed wisely. So just in case you haven't heard it enough times before I move on, let's go over it once more. Is it true? 5 things. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it of benefit to the other person? That's tricky. Is it kind? Or is it the right time? And if we ask ourselves those things, we would probably say a lot less. Can we speak it in kindness? Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it the right timing? Is it of benefit to the other person? So next comes right action, which involves refraining from killing and stealing and sexual misconduct. It's a commitment to do no harm and ideally to do some good. In the Digha Nikaya, the Buddha says, abandoning the taking of life, one abstains from taking life. With a stick laid down, a knife laid down, scrupulous, merciful, trembling for the welfare of all beings. Right action is the ethical path of doing no harm. As I mentioned, the Buddha defined it as refraining from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. At its heart, right action is about living with integrity and compassion in the body. How many of you know Joseph Goldstein? Has anybody heard of Joseph Goldstein? He's also the co-founder, one of the several co-founders of Insight Meditation Society that's in Barre, Massachusetts. And he's a well-known Vipassana meditation teacher and has lots of talks on Dharma Seed, which is a nice place to go hear talks. And he says the importance of personal integrity and responsibility needs to be continually re-articulated so we don't simply get lost in the confusion of our own desires and impulses. I think I'm going to read that again. The importance of personal integrity and responsibility needs to be continually re-articulated so we don't simply get lost in the confusion of our own desires and impulses. One example that still humbles me happened during a hike a few years ago. I came across a beetle that was flipped upside down on its back and its legs were flailing, and my first impulse was to keep walking. You know, after all, it's just a bug. But something happened, something stopped inside of me, and maybe the stillness of the woods or maybe the beetle's silent struggle, you know what they look like when they're laying there, can't get themselves flipped over, and I knelt down and I gently righted it with a twig. And it scuttled off to the underbrush. And that small act felt oddly momentous. And ever since that time, years ago, I've been on the lookout for small animals that might be struggling. Like removing the gigantic cane spiders in Hawaii out of the shower. I trap them with a glass and put a piece of paper under it and then take it outside. They're gigantic spiders, cane spiders. You know, the Buddha teaches to avoid all evil and to cultivate good and to purify the mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Can you ever remember catching a mistake? Like, I caught a mistake on a paycheck one time. Maybe it's happened to some other people. It was an accidental overpayment, and when it happened to me, I hesitated. Who would notice? I was new to the Dharma and understanding the repercussions of karma and harmonious living with others. And as I pondered this, I remembered a sutta where the Buddha tells his son, Rahula, he talks to his son and he says, he's talking to him about lying, and he says, if you are ashamed to do it before others, don't do it in private. So I emailed my employer and told them about it, and they were surprised and impressed. And integrity, it turns out, really is its own reward. And I'm sure you can think of other examples when things happen where, you know, there's those pencils at the bank or somewhere where you could take a whole handful, but really you just take one. You know, not every act has to be dramatic. Sometimes right action means not squashing the spider in the shower, or choosing tofu instead of chicken, or refraining from gossip. These small gestures accumulate into a life that causes less harm. As the Buddha says in one of his other suttas, even the smallest wholesome action, if repeated, bears fruit. And so let's be honest, right action can be awkward. And ethical action is about being present, being honest, and being willing to course correct when we fall short. A few years ago, I was visiting in Honolulu. I was living on Maui, where I lived for 35 years, and I was visiting in Honolulu. And I found a wallet at a gas station. And it was stuffed with cash and credit cards, and there was no ID. I was tempted, who wouldn't be? But I dropped it off at the station desk, and I left my number. And 2 days later, someone called and told me that I saved their week. And that moment reminded me that right action isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing the decent thing, especially when it's inconvenient. And also about noticing how good it feels to do something simple and good. And in turn, I had this favor returned to me one time. When I was in Honolulu, I left my cell phone at a bus stop. Oh my gosh, it was 10 o'clock at night. For about 20 minutes, I kept calling my phone to see if someone would answer it. And finally someone did answer it, who was on the bus going to his home, and he had picked up my phone. And he was going to go ahead and go home on the bus, get in his car and turn around and drive back at 10 o'clock at night to give me my wallet. What a sweetheart. And he did just that. It was a real blessing. Sharon Salzberg said, "The path begins with cultivating appreciation of our oneness, our oneness with others through generosity, non-harming, right speech, and right action." It's said that our mind is like a garden. Every action plants a seed in the garden. The wholesome actions are like beautiful flower seeds. The unwholesome actions are like spiky thistle seeds. The unwholesome actions, if you spend most of your time planting beautiful seeds, the garden of your mind and life will become easeful and wonderful. But if you spend your time planting unwholesome actions, painful seeds, the garden of your mind and life will be difficult. Imagine spending 10 minutes a day sitting and contemplating things you liked about the people that you know. How might that have a downstream effect on your day and on your life? Maybe you'd be in a better mood. Maybe you'd be more inclined to give spontaneous compliments. Maybe you'd be a little kinder and more forgiving. Conversely, imagine spending 10 minutes a day sitting, contemplating things you didn't like about the people that you know. Consider the different downstream impact. Basically, how you relate to this moment informs how you relate to future moments. So next we come to right livelihood, work that doesn't harm. Right livelihood is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean we all have to be monks or mindfulness teachers. It means choosing work that doesn't cause harm to others or to ourselves or to the world. The Buddha lists 5 professions to avoid. And this is interesting for our time, 2,600 years ago, still. 5 professions to avoid. Dealing in weapons, or dealing with living beings like slave trading or trafficking, meat production, intoxicants, and poisons. And he also encourages us to examine our intentions, the result of our work and its impact. Right livelihood is this 3rd aspect of Sīla, and it refers to earning a living in a way that is honest, ethical, and harmless. The Buddha was clear that traders in weapons, living beings, meat, intoxicants, or poisons are not engaging in right livelihood. But for most of us, the challenge lies not in avoiding a dramatic violation, but in staying awake to the subtleties of our work. Of course, no job is perfect. A nun once said to me, "If you can't make your living without harming, can you reduce the harm?" That became my guiding question. Could I write more honestly? Could I choose clients more mindfully? Could I support coworkers more compassionately? I had a massage client one time last year who was really in a dilemma about doing marketing work for a big box corporation here in Portland. And it was going to be good pay. She had done it easily before. But now there was a moral dilemma that arose in the thought of working for the company. And after thinking about it long and hard, it took a couple days. She came back and talked to me about it twice, and she decided to seek more work that was more in line with her values. And so she found a job for a nonprofit that focused on environmental education with marginalized children. The pay was lower, the hours longer, but she slept better. And the trees she thought about seemed to thank her too. One day she was leading a group of children on a nature walk and they found a salamander under a log. The kids squealed with joy. In that moment, she said she thought, this is it. This is right livelihood. The Buddha tells a householder that it's not easy to lead the holy life while living in a house. But it is possible to live honorably, one choice at a time. Even in complex systems, we can bring our deepest values to our work. And we should also note that right livelihood doesn't mean that your job has to scream spiritual. The Buddha didn't say you have to become a crystal healer or open a vegan bakery, though that's fine too. He just said, make your living in a way that doesn't cause harm and that supports your practice. And if your work lets you serve in some way, even better. During a retreat on this rural center that I used to help manage on Maui, I took an afternoon walk and I stumbled on a cow that was standing at a fence just gazing out into the eucalyptus trees. And she seemed a little lonely. I don't know why, but I stood with her for 10 minutes. I just stood there breathing and watching. Later I learned that she was the last of a small herd that had been sold off, and she'd been calling for them for days. I know that that moment shaped me. It reminded me that our work, whatever it is, should make space for stillness, for connection, and for care. Right livelihood means we make a living in ways that let us sleep well at night, and maybe even make the world a little better place. And so I think I'll bring this to a close in a few moments so that we can also have some conversation with each other and some reflection. But I'll mention that right speech, right action, and right livelihood, and how it creates this web of integrity. That Sīla isn't a list of rules. It's a web of relationships with others and with ourselves and with the planet. It's how we show up in conversation, in conflict, in our jobs, or in the woods. Internally, the training in Sīla encompasses our physical, mental, and emotional health. It teaches us to swap self-criticism for self-kindness. It gets us to transform emotional imbalances and to find more joy and awe and gratitude and love in our lives. It may include going to therapy or being rejuvenated by nature. Externally, Sīla includes things like learning how to be an empathetic and compassionate communicator. It involves service, giving, and living simply. It points us to our relationship with media and consumption. It may involve things like activism or political engagement. When we live ethically, we don't just avoid harm, we cultivate peace. We become trustworthy, and we begin to see that ethical living isn't separate from awakening. It's awakening in motion. Ethical conduct isn't about perfection, it's about direction. The Sīla steps of the path help us live with integrity, gentleness, and clarity, one choice at a time. As a local Dharma teacher, David Sudar, mentioned in his latest newsletter, which coincidentally was about Sīla, I had to chuckle, so I had to quote him. He suggested we start from the ground of seeing that what we do matters, and setting a clear intention to use our life to move away from suffering and toward well-being. From there, we get interested in observing and learning about our karmic cycles, motive, action, and impact. If we are diligent with looking at this, harmonious and ethical action tends to follow. As all of the Buddhist practices boil down to suffering or dissatisfaction and the end of suffering, the basic question of Sīla, which actions lead to suffering and which to well-being for myself and others. If you keep this inquiry in your mind, which actions lead to suffering and which to well-being for myself and others? If you keep this inquiry on your mind, maintain and refresh a deep intention to be a force of good in the world, and nurture a steady mindfulness that pays attention to cause and effect, you really know everything you need to know. As Mark Nunberg, a contemporary teacher who founded Common Ground Meditation Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, said, "We transform our hearts and the world by cultivating and living with this deep understanding." Thank you for your practice. Let's sit for a few moments and let the words settle down. The path begins with cultivating appreciation of our oneness with others through generosity, non-harming, right speech, and right action.